The city's grandest gala glittered under a sea of chandeliers. Dresses sparkled like stars, and tuxedos moved like black shadows across the marble floors. Everyone who mattered was there: investors, socialites, celebrities. Yet William Carter, the man everyone wanted to impress, stood alone by the bar, his glass untouched. His expression was distant, almost disinterested, as the shallow conversations floated around him like smoke. Across the room, a murmur rippled through the crowd. A woman, draped in a golden gown that screamed money and arrogance, laughed loudly, clinking her champagne against another guest's glass. Eleanor Whitley, heiress, influencer, and the undisputed queen of society scandals. She spotted William and, like a lioness, made her move, her entourage trailing behind her like trained hounds. "William," Eleanor purred, slipping an arm around his elbow. "Finally decided to show yourself to the real world." Her voice was sweet poison. Guests turned their heads, sensing a performance about to unfold. William offered her a tight smile but didn't move an inch to encourage her touch. Before he could respond, a sharp crash echoed from the main entrance. Heads snapped toward the noise. A towering, multi-layered cake, the centerpiece of the gala, lay in ruins across the marble floor. A young woman, barely older than 20, stood amidst the wreckage, her apron stained with frosting and horror frozen on her face. She clutched a cardboard box marked Sullivan's Bakery, clearly a delivery that had gone catastrophically wrong. Laughter broke through the tension like a crack of thunder. Eleanor sneered, raising her voice loud enough for the crowd. "What did they do? Let the kitchen staff crash the party now?" Her words sliced through the room. William's gaze locked on the girl. She wasn't crying, not yet, but her cheeks flushed scarlet with shame as she bent to gather the mess with trembling hands. Something twisted in William's chest. Anger. Not at the girl. At them. At all of them. "Enough!" William's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. The room fell eerily silent. All eyes turned to him as he stepped forward, his expensive shoes splattering frosting as he approached the girl. He knelt beside her, his custom-made suit brushing the sticky marble, and helped her gather the broken pieces. "You're not the one who should be embarrassed," he said low enough for her to hear, handing her a shard of ceramic. Her eyes, wide and glassy with unshed tears, blinked up at him. For a heartbeat, the world around them ceased to exist. Eleanor's face twisted in disbelief. "William, really? She's nobody," she barked, her voice rising with fury. "You're humiliating yourself." He rose slowly, facing Eleanor with a calmness that felt more dangerous than any shout. "I'd rather be humiliated than be like you," he said. Gasps rippled across the crowd. A cameraman from a gossip outlet, sensing a golden moment, snapped a photo just as Eleanor's face went pale with rage. Without another word, William turned back to the girl. "What's your name?" His voice, softer now, carried through the hall. "Emily," she whispered, barely audible. "Emily Jones." "Emily Jones," he repeated, almost as if testing the weight of the name. "You're coming with me." He extended his hand. For a split second, hesitation flickered across her features, but the cruelty of the crowd behind her pushed her forward. She took his hand. As they walked out together, the whispers turned into a storm. Some gasped in shock. Others hurried to capture videos on their phones. Eleanor stood frozen, humiliated in a way she had never known before. She would not forget, and she would not forgive. Outside, the cold night air slapped against their faces. Emily shivered, clutching her box tighter. William shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders without a word. For a man who commanded boardrooms and bent markets to his will, the gesture was startlingly gentle. She dared to glance at him. Why did you help me?" She asked, voice cracking from nerves and cold. William looked ahead, into the dark city skyline. Because sometimes the people who are laughed at are the ones worth knowing. His voice carried a weariness, a hidden wound he didn't care to explain. Emily swallowed hard, still clutching the jacket around herself. She didn't belong in his world. She knew it, but for reasons she couldn't understand yet, fate had just torn open a door she never knew existed, and something deep inside her whispered she might just have the courage to walk through it. The next morning, Emily stared at the ceiling of her cramped apartment, the jacket William had lent her neatly folded on the chair. It smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something warmer, something grounding. She replayed the night in her mind, the cake, the laughter, the way he had knelt beside her like she wasn't invisible. She turned over, groaning into her pillow. "What was that?" she muttered. "And what happens now?" Her phone buzzed sharply, jarring her out of the spiral. A message. Unknown number. "Meet me at Sullivan's Bakery, noon, W." Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. Was this a prank? A continuation of last night's humiliation? Part of her wanted to ignore it, to stay safely hidden under her worn-out quilt. But another part, the braver part, knew she had to go. At exactly noon, she pushed open the bakery's glass door. The familiar scent of warm bread and sugar hit her, momentarily soothing her nerves. She spotted him immediately. William Carter, sitting casually at a corner table, scrolling through his phone like he wasn't the most recognizable man in the city. When he looked up and saw her, a small smile flickered across his face. Not the polished grin he wore at business meetings, but something real. Emily approached cautiously, her hands twisting the strap of her worn-out messenger bag. "You're actually here," she said, half in disbelief. "I said I would be," he replied simply, motioning to the chair across from him. "Sit, please." She hesitated, then slid into the seat, acutely aware of the curious glances from the bakery staff. William leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "I have a proposition for you." Her stomach twisted. Propositions from billionaires in movies never ended well. "What kind of proposition?" she asked carefully. "I want to hire you," William said, voice low and deliberate, "as my personal chef." Emily blinked at him, stunned. You what?" she stammered, almost laughing from the absurdity. She half expected him to grin and reveal it was all a joke, some elaborate social experiment. "You heard me," William continued, undeterred. "My staff cooks are fine, efficient, but there's no soul in what they make. I need real food, honest food." His eyes pinned her in place. "I need someone like you." Emily sat back, heart racing. "William," she said carefully, I'm just a bakery assistant. I deliver cupcakes and sometimes burn cookies. I'm not some Michelin-starred chef." "Exactly," he said, a hint of intensity sharpening his voice. "You're not pretending to be something you're not." He pulled out a contract from his sleek leather briefcase and slid it across the table. "Read it. Decide." Her fingers hovered over the folder. It felt surreal, like a test she hadn't studied for. "Why me?" she whispered, needing to understand. William exhaled, the hard lines of his face softening. "Because when everyone else laughed, you didn't crumble. You stood there. That takes more strength than anyone in that gala combined." For a moment, vulnerability flashed in his eyes, a crack in the armor. Emily swallowed hard, emotions tangling inside her. She could say no, return to her safe, small life. But deep down, she knew the truth. Nothing about her life felt safe or small anymore. She was already falling into his world, whether she liked it or not. She opened the folder with trembling hands. The salary made her breath hitch. 5 times what she made in a month at the bakery. Security, freedom, a way to help her mother, to maybe go back to school. Her head screamed run, but her heart whispered leap. "I have conditions," Emily said, surprising even herself. William's eyebrow lifted, intrigued. "First," she said, voice firmer, "I want control over my own kitchen. No interference." He nodded. "Once. Second, I need 2 days off a week, non-negotiable." "Done," he said immediately. "And third," she hesitated, then forced it out, "I don't want to be part of your social circle. No galas, no interviews. I'm just your chef, nothing more." William studied her for a moment, something unreadable in his expression. "If that's what you want," he said slowly, "I'll respect it." The bakery bell jingled as someone entered, breaking the heavy silence. Emily glanced at the contract again, then up at him. His face was steady, patient. For a man used to snapping his fingers and getting the world, he was giving her all the time she needed. She picked up the pen lying next to the folder. Her fingers closed around it tightly, and with a signature that felt like setting off a bomb. Inside her chest, she changed the course of her life. Emily clutched the folder against her chest as the car wound its way through the hills toward William's estate. The world outside the window blurred into shades of green and stone, like a painting she didn't quite belong in. She glanced at William, who was tapping silently on his phone, his jaw tense. For all his calm demeanor, she could sense it. He was nervous too. When the gates opened with a mechanical whir, Emily's breath caught. The Carter estate wasn't just a house. It was a fortress of glass and steel perched on a cliffside, modern, cold, and breathtakingly beautiful. It looked like it belonged in a magazine, not in real life. She shrank deeper into her seat, questioning every decision that had brought her here. Inside, the staff moved like clockwork, housekeepers polishing surfaces that already gleamed, assistants speaking in hushed, efficient tones. No one looked her in the eye. They didn't have to. Their stiff smiles said enough. "You don't belong here." William seemed not to notice, or maybe he was used to it. He led her down a hallway lined with abstract art until they reached a heavy oak door. He paused, hand on the handle, and looked back at her. For the first time since the gala, Emily caught a flicker of something raw in his eyes. Uncertainty. "Your kingdom," he said, pushing the door open. The kitchen was enormous, high ceilings, stainless steel everywhere, marble countertops that stretched endlessly, industrial stoves, state-of-the-art appliances, knives gleaming under spotlights. It should have felt empowering. Instead, Emily felt tiny. "You'll have full control," William said, walking in and running a hand along a counter. "No one comes in here unless you allow it. Not even me." His mouth twitched upward, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Emily set the folder down carefully on the counter. She wandered the kitchen, fingertips brushing surfaces, inspecting the spice racks, the ingredient pantry. It was perfect. Sterile, yes, but perfect. Yet something about the space felt haunted, like it held stories she wasn't meant to know. She turned back to William. "How many chefs have you hired before me?" she asked casually, but her voice trembled slightly. He hesitated. "A few." His answer was too quick, too vague. Emily caught the shadow flickering across his face. She tucked that away, the first puzzle piece she hadn't asked for, but received anyway. Later, as she unpacked her own knives and supplies, well-worn, humble compared to the gleaming sets provided, she found a small envelope tucked into one of the lower drawers. Curious, she slid it open. Inside was a crumpled photo of a woman in chef whites standing in the very kitchen Emily now occupied. The woman was smiling broadly, flower on her nose, pride in her stance. Written on the back in messy cursive, "For better days." Duh. Emily's throat tightened. She glanced at the door, but William was long gone. A cold prickle ran down her spine. Who was A? Why was her photo hidden, forgotten? Dinner that night was awkward. Emily cooked a simple meal. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, sautéed greens, the kind of food that smelled like home. She plated it carefully and brought it to William, who was sitting alone at a long, cold dining table that could seat 20. He looked up, surprised, as she set the plate down. "You're not eating." She shook her head. "Chef eats after the client." It wasn't just politeness. She needed distance, needed to remember this was a job, not an invitation into his world. William studied the food, then her. Something heavy settled between them. "You cook like this every day at the bakery?" "Only when they let me," she said, trying to sound casual. She didn't want to talk about the bakery, about how the owner stole her best recipes and claimed them as his own, about how she had been invisible even there. William ate slowly, deliberately. Emily noticed something odd. He chewed thoughtfully, like he was trying to remember something the taste reminded him of. When he finished, he pushed the plate slightly forward. "Best meal I've had in years." A flush crept up her neck. She opened her mouth to thank him, but a loud crash echoed down the hall before she could. Both their heads snapped toward the noise. William's face tightened, the easy calm he wore slipping away in an instant. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and hard. But Emily had already seen the truth in his eyes. There were things in this house, secrets that no contract could protect her from. Emily stood frozen in the kitchen, heart hammering against her ribs. The crash had shattered the fragile calm William built around himself. She glanced toward the door, half expecting something or someone to burst through it. The silence that followed was somehow louder, pressing against her ears until she thought she might scream. Seconds ticked by. William didn't return immediately. Against her better judgment, Emily crept toward the entrance, peeking down the dim hallway. Shadows stretched long and uncertain. She caught a glimpse of William speaking urgently with a man in a black suit, a bodyguard maybe. But their voices were muffled, indecipherable. Part of her wanted to retreat, to pretend. She hadn't seen anything. But another, more stubborn part, the part that survived bakery backrooms and elitist mockery, pushed her forward. Carefully, silently, Emily inched closer, her shoes making no sound against the marble floors, polished to a mirror shine. William's words finally floated back to her, sharp and brittle. "I told you, lock that door. No one is allowed downstairs." The bodyguard muttered something she couldn't catch, but William's reply was cold and unmistakable. "If anyone gets down there, it's over. Understand me? Over." Emily's heart skipped painfully. Downstairs. What was he hiding? She thought of the abandoned photo in the drawer, the haunted look that flickered across William's face when she mentioned previous chefs. Dread slithered into her stomach, heavy and coiled. When William returned to the kitchen, his face was a mask of calm, but she saw the tightness around his mouth, the storm behind his eyes. "False alarm," he said smoothly, picking up a glass of water as if nothing had happened. "Sorry if it scared." "You?" Emily nodded stiffly, pretending to buy the lie. She dried her hands on her apron to hide how much they were shaking. "It's fine." Her voice betrayed her, thinner than she intended. William's eyes lingered on her a moment too long, as if he wanted to say more, but didn't. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The room they had given her, a guest suite bigger than her entire apartment, felt more like a cage. She tossed and turned, haunted by images she couldn't explain. The hidden photo, the slammed doors, the warning in William's voice. She didn't know this man at all. Somewhere past midnight, driven by an ache she couldn't name, she slipped quietly from her room. The mansion was silent, save for the distant hum of electronics and the sigh of wind against the windows. She padded barefoot through the halls, feeling half like an intruder, half like a detective. The staircase to the lower floors was tucked, away behind an unassuming door near the library. Emily's hand hovered over the handle. Every instinct screamed at her to go back, but her curiosity, sharper than fear now, urged her on. She pushed the door open, Cold air whooshed up from the dark stairwell, smelling faintly of damp stone and something metallic. Emily wrapped her arms around herself and descended cautiously, the steps creaking under her weight. She reached the bottom, where another, heavy, door barred her path. She pressed her ear against it, voices, faint but urgent, two men arguing. One of them she recognized instantly. William. The other voice was unfamiliar, rougher, angrier. "You can't keep it hidden forever," the stranger hissed. "I have no choice," William snapped back. "Too many lives were ruined the last time." Emily jerked away from the door as if burned. She didn't understand. Not fully. But one thing was clear. William was keeping something buried deep, something that had hurt people before. A secret so dangerous he was willing to lie, manipulate, even threaten to protect it. She fled back up the stairs, her pulse a wild drumbeat in her ears. She couldn't breathe until she was safely locked inside her room again, back under her quilt, the walls of the suite pressing in around her like a tomb. Morning came with brutal clarity. Emily stumbled into the kitchen, dark circles under her eyes, only to find William already there. He was reading the newspaper, acting as if everything was normal. He looked up at her and smiled, forced, tight, and for the first time she realized something terrifying. William Carter was a man at war with himself. And Emily? She had just stepped onto the battlefield. The kitchen was bathed in the soft golden light of morning, but to Emily everything felt colder, heavier. She kept her distance from William, watching him out of the corner of her eye as he sipped black coffee and skimmed headlines. To the world, he looked like any other powerful businessman. Only she knew the cracks beneath the surface. She pulled out ingredients from the pantry mechanically, eggs, flour, sugar, planning to bake something simple to fill the silence. Her movements were efficient, but her mind raced. Every clink of a spoon, every whisk of batter felt louder, as if the house itself was listening. She needed something normal, something familiar. As she cracked eggs into a bowl, she heard William's chair scrape back. She tensed instinctively, but he only crossed to the counter, leaning against it with an almost casual air. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms. His face was unreadable. "You bake when you're upset," he said quietly. Emily's hands froze mid-whisk. She shot him a wary glance. "You notice everything, don't you?" "Only the important things," William replied, his voice rougher than usual, like he was tired of pretending. There was a beat of uncomfortable silence before Emily spoke again. "Is there anything you don't control in this house?" Her tone was sharper than she intended, but she didn't apologize. She was done tiptoeing around him. William smiled thinly, sadness flickering across his face. "More than you think." He reached for a stray apple from the fruit bowl, tossing it lightly between his hands. Sometimes, the things we try hardest to control are the things slipping away fastest. Emily set the whisk down harder than necessary. "You mean secrets?" she asked without looking at him. The air shifted. She could feel his guard snapping back up. "Some things are better left buried, Emily," William said quietly, almost a plea. She turned to face him fully, flour dusting her apron, defiance burning in her chest. "Buried things have a habit of clawing their way out eventually," she said. "Especially in houses like this." Their eyes locked, her honesty against his silence. For a moment she thought he might storm out. Instead, he did something she didn't expect. He laughed, low, bitter, almost amazed. "You're dangerous," he murmured. "More dangerous than anyone here realizes." Emily crossed her arms. "Because I tell you the truth?" "Because you make me want to," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. The weight of his confession hung between them, thick and heavy. Emily didn't know what to say. No one had ever looked at her like that, like she was a mirror he couldn't escape from. She broke the gaze first, busying herself with the cake batter, as if the simple repetitive motion could shield her. William didn't push. He just stood there, watching her stir and measure and pour. When the cake went into the oven, the smell of vanilla and sugar filled the kitchen, wrapping them both in something fragile and fleeting, a memory of easier times neither had truly known. Finally, William cleared his throat. "Let me help," he said awkwardly, reaching for a second apron hanging on a hook. Emily blinked at him. "You? Cook?" He smirked. "Stranger things have happened." And so, side by side, they prepared lunch: pasta, roasted vegetables, a simple salad. William was clumsy at first, slicing a tomato too thick, nearly burning the garlic. Emily laughed, really laughed, for the first time since arriving. The sound startled them both. In that warm, messy kitchen, something shifted. The walls between them, so carefully built, began to crumble brick by cautious brick. Trust wasn't demanded here. It was kneaded into dough, simmered into sauce, baked into golden cake. As they sat down to eat, sunlight streaming through the windows, Emily realized something terrifying and wonderful. She was starting to care. And if she wasn't careful, caring might just destroy her. The days blurred into a rhythm neither of them dared to question. Emily would cook. William would linger in the kitchen under the pretense of business calls or casual curiosity. Each interaction was a tug of war. Words left unsaid, glances that lingered too long. It was fragile, this dance between them, as if speaking the truth aloud would shatter everything. Late one evening, after the staff had left and the house had fallen into its unnatural stillness, Emily found herself sitting with William in the library. He was pretending to read, but she could see the stiffness in his posture. She stirred her tea absently, eyes flicking toward the grand piano tucked into the corner of the room. "Do you play?" she asked, voice soft in the velvet hush. William didn't look up. "Used to, a long time ago." Emily set her cup down, curiosity prickling. "What happened?" He finally lifted his gaze, and for a moment the mask slipped. "Life," he said simply, and she understood it wasn't a conversation he was ready to have. Not yet. Instead, she stood and wandered toward the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys, brushing lightly, coaxing out a soft, tentative chord. It rang through the empty room like a ghost's sigh. She glanced back at him, expecting a reprimand. Instead, he was watching her, a strange look on his face. "You're not afraid of touching things that don't belong to you," he murmured. Emily smiled, bittersweet. "Nothing here really belongs to anyone. Not even you." The words hit deeper than she intended, and she saw it. The flicker of pain he tried so hard to hide. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into something much bigger than herself. The man upstairs, the house itself. It was like a labyrinth, and somewhere at the center something was waiting, watching. A few nights later, her suspicions took root. She was finishing cleaning up the kitchen when she heard it, voices again coming from below, but this time it wasn't anger she heard. It was pleading, desperation. "You promised!" a woman's voice cried out, cracking with emotion. "I did what I had to," William's voice snapped back. Emily pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding. She couldn't make out much more, but one thing was clear. William was not just protecting secrets. He was making enemies, and whoever that woman was, she had once mattered deeply. The next morning, William acted as if nothing had happened. But Emily noticed the shadows under his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly when he thought. No one was watching. He was unraveling, and if she stayed close, she might get pulled under too. As she set breakfast in front of him, their hands brushed, just barely, but enough to make her flinch back. William froze. "Emily." She shook her head, stepping away. "I need space," she said quickly, voice almost breaking. "I can't breathe in this house." He didn't argue. He just watched her leave, the ache in his eyes saying all the things he wouldn't. Outside, Emily gulped the crisp autumn air like it was salvation. She sat on the stone steps overlooking the cliffs, wrapping her arms around herself. She knew. Now, there were pieces of William Carter no one had ever seen, shards sharp enough to cut, and still some reckless part of her wanted to reach for him. Later that evening, when she returned to the kitchen, she found a small slip of paper, folded neatly on the counter. No signature, just a line scribbled in hurried ink. "You deserve to know the truth, but are you ready to hear it?" Emily closed her eyes, a shiver running down her spine. The game had changed. And ready or not, she was already too deep to walk away. The note weighed heavily in Emily's pocket all day. Every time she touched it, her heart clenched. Questions gnawed at her louder than ever. Who left it? Was it a warning? An invitation? By the time dinner rolled around, she was unraveling, nerves stretched so tight she jumped at every sound. William noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed. But he said nothing, his eyes following her as she moved around the kitchen, quietly, observing, waiting for her to crack. Emily hated how well he could read her now, how exposed she felt even without speaking a word. When she placed his plate in front of him, their eyes locked for a beat too long. Emily couldn't take it. She blurted the words out like ripping off a bandage. "Who's the woman?" she asked. "The one you were arguing with downstairs?" The fork in William's hand froze mid-air. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop breathing. Then he set the fork down carefully, his expression closing off like a vault. "You were eavesdropping," he said, voice dangerously low. "You were hiding," Emily shot back, surprising herself with the fierceness. "I deserve to know what I'm caught up in." Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't back down. She couldn't. William leaned back in his chair, studying her with a coldness she hadn't seen before. "Curiosity," he said slowly, "can be a dangerous thing, Emily." "So can silence," she replied, "especially when it's filled with lies." Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or something darker. For a moment she thought he might confess. Instead, he stood abruptly, sending his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Stay out of things you don't understand," he snapped, before disappearing down the hallway without another word. Emily stood there, shaking with anger and fear and something worse. Betrayal. She had trusted him more than she should have. She had believed, even for a moment, that maybe she was safe here. Stupid, naive. She stormed out of the kitchen, wandering aimlessly through the mansion's endless halls. Every painting, every polished surface seemed to mock her. She wasn't. Part of this world, she never would be. The realization stung worse than she expected. Her feet carried her to the library, almost by instinct. She sat heavily in the armchair by the window, pulling the note out again. Her fingers smoothed the creases, staring at the words. "You deserve to know the truth. But are you ready to hear it?" Maybe she wasn't ready, but that didn't matter. She needed to know. Suddenly, a soft rustling sound caught her attention. She turned sharply, heart leaping into her throat. A figure stood half-shrouded in the shadows of the hallway. A woman, tall, elegant, with dark hair pulled into a severe bun and cold eyes that glittered like knives. "You're Emily," the woman said, her voice dripping disdain. "The new project." Emily bristled. "Who are you?" The woman smiled, a sharp, humorless thing. Someone who learned the hard way not to trust William Carter. Before Emily could respond, the woman pressed a small envelope into her hand. "If you want to survive here, open this when you're alone." And just like that, she was gone, slipping away into the darkness before Emily could even demand answers. Hands trembling, Emily retreated to her room. She locked the door, drew the curtains, heart hammering so loudly she thought it might drown out her thoughts. Slowly, she opened the envelope. Inside was a photo. Two, actually. The first showed William, years younger, standing arm in arm with the woman from the hallway, smiling, relaxed, happy. The second photo was much worse. It showed the woman screaming at William in a courtroom, papers flying between them, fury etched into every line of her face. On the back, in scrawled handwriting, "He ruins everything he touches. Don't let it be you." Emily dropped the photos as if they burned her. She stumbled back, collapsing onto the bed. Her mind raced, her heart shattered in her chest. She wanted to believe it wasn't true, but a small, cruel voice whispered inside her head, "You already know it is." The next morning dawned grey and heavy, the sky pressing down like a weight. Emily barely slept. The photos haunted her, gnawing away at the fragile foundation of trust she had so carefully built with William. Every look, every kind gesture. Was it all manipulation? Was she just another pawn in a game she didn't understand? She dressed, mechanically, her hands fumbling with the buttons of her blouse. The envelope sat on her nightstand, like a wound left open, daring her to confront it. Part of her wanted to run, pack her things and disappear before William could destroy her the way he had destroyed others. But another part, the stubborn, angry part, needed answers. Emily found William in the study, surrounded by reports and blueprints. He looked up when she entered, his face softening instinctively. But something in her expression must have warned him, because the warmth drained from his eyes almost instantly. "We need to talk," Emily said, voice steady despite the tempest raging inside her. William set down his pen carefully, folding his hands in front of him. "About?" She threw the photos onto the desk between them like a gauntlet. "About the truth," she said coldly. "About who you really are." For a moment, William didn't move. He stared at the photos, his jaw tightening. Then he leaned back slowly, a shadow crossing his face. "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter?" Emily snapped. "Are they real?" William's silence was answer enough. Emily felt something inside her crack, a deep fissure spreading through the trust she had foolishly placed in him. "You ruined her life," she said, voice breaking despite herself, "and now you're doing the same to me." "I never meant to hurt you," William said, standing now, towering over the desk like a storm about to break. "But you don't understand, Emily. You don't know the whole story." "Then tell me," she shouted, fists clenching at her sides. "Stop hiding behind half-truths and lies. You owe me that much." For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Two forces colliding, neither willing to break first. Finally, William exhaled, the fight bleeding out of him. He looked tired, older somehow. "Her name was Helena," he said quietly. "She was my business partner, my friend. I trusted her, more than anyone, and she betrayed me." His voice cracked on the last word. Emily crossed her arms tightly, not ready to soften yet. "So what happened?" "She embezzled from the company we built together," William said, bitterness lacing every word. "Millions. She almost bankrupted us. I exposed her, and she retaliated by dragging me through court, the media, everything. She destroyed my reputation because she couldn't destroy my success." Emily wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But the doubt gnawed at her like termites under a floorboard. "And now, you're dragging me into your world of secrets and enemies without even giving me a choice." William's eyes burned into hers. "I brought you here because I trusted you," he said fiercely, "because for the first time in years I saw something real. And you're right, maybe I ruin everything I touch, but I never wanted to ruin you." The rawness in his voice punched a hole straight through her defenses. Emily staggered back a step, the force of her emotions nearly buckling her knees. Anger, sorrow, fear, they all tangled inside her, an unbearable knot. "I need time," she whispered. "I need to think." William nodded once, stiffly. "Take all the time you need." Emily fled before he could see the tears streaming down her face. She ran through the endless corridors of the house, past the gleaming staircases and polished walls, until she burst out into the open air, gasping like a drowning woman breaking the surface. She stood there, shivering, staring out at the grey sea below. She had crossed a line she could never uncross, and no matter what choice she made now, nothing would ever be the same. The wind whipped through Emily's hair as she stood at the edge of the cliff, the ocean roaring below. She closed her eyes against the sting of salt and regret. How had it come to this? Only a few weeks ago she was a nobody delivering pastries to overpriced parties. Now she was tangled in the life of a man she barely understood, and worse, tangled in feelings she couldn't ignore. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't reach for it. She knew it was William, or maybe it was Helena, ready to twist the knife deeper. Either way, she didn't want to hear more lies or half-truths. She needed to hear her own voice first, the one she had been silencing for too long. Instead of returning to the mansion, Emily found herself wandering through the narrow streets of the nearby village. It was quiet here, the houses weathered but warm, children's laughter drifting on the breeze. For a brief, painful moment, she wished she belonged here. Somewhere small, somewhere safe. An old church sat at the center of town, its wooden, the doors wide open. Emily hesitated on the threshold before slipping inside. The smell of old wood and melted wax wrapped around her like a blanket. She sat in the last pew, staring up at the stained glass windows, letting the silence seep into her bones. Her mind drifted back to her mother, a woman who had taught her to be strong, to keep moving no matter who tried to knock her down. Her mother had worked 3 jobs, never complained, and taught Emily that trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. Maybe that's why this betrayal cut so deep. She had allowed herself to believe she could be different, that she could be loved without fear. A soft cough broke her reverie. Emily turned to see an elderly woman, a kind smile on her wrinkled face standing a few feet away. "Lost, dear?" the woman asked gently. Emily laughed bitterly. "More than I can explain." The woman sat beside her without invitation. "We all carry ghosts," she said. "The trick is learning which ones to let go, and which ones to make peace with." Emily stared at her, stunned by the eerie relevance of the words. She didn't know if it was the comfort of a stranger or the stillness of the church, but something inside her cracked open. "What if you're scared you'll choose wrong?" she whispered. The woman patted her hand. "Then you choose with your heart. It'll hurt either way, but at least it'll be honest." When Emily left the church, dusk had fallen, painting the sky in bruised colors. She walked slowly back toward the mansion, her steps heavier with each passing moment. The closer she got, the more she realized the choice she had to make wasn't about William. It was about herself. Was she going to keep running every time the ground shifted beneath her feet? Or was she finally going to stand still and fight? Not for him, but for the life she wanted. Lights glowed warmly from the windows as she approached the house. It looked different now, less like a fortress, more like a test. She paused at the front door, her hand hovering over the handle, her heart thundering so loudly she wondered if William could hear it too. When she pushed the door open, the house was silent, too silent. Her steps echoed as she crossed the foyer. No staff. No William, just shadows and unanswered questions. She made her way to the kitchen, half expecting to find him waiting at the counter like always. Instead, she found another envelope. No handwriting this time, just her name printed, neatly on the front, Emily tore it open with shaking hands, her eyes devouring the words inside. "If you can forgive me, meet me where it all began." No signature, no directions. But she knew exactly where to go. Heart in her throat, Emily turned and ran. Past the kitchen, down the halls, through the heavy oak door that led to the cliffside gardens where they'd first really spoken. Where honesty had first cracked through their defenses like sunlight. The wind battered her, but she kept going, breathless and wild, because for the first time she wasn't running away. She was running towards something, or someone. She wasn't ready to lose. The cliffside garden was empty, bathed in the silver light of the rising moon. Waves thundered against the rocks below, each crash echoing through the hollow space inside Emily's chest. She hugged herself tightly, the night air biting at her skin, searching the shadows for any sign of him. For a terrifying moment she thought she had been wrong, that he wouldn't come, that this was another trick, another manipulation she had been foolish enough to fall for. She turned to leave, and that's when she saw him, standing by the edge, his silhouette framed against the endless dark sea. William didn't move when she approached. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his shoulders stiff, as if he were bracing for a blow. Emily stopped a few feet away, heart hammering. The space between them was electric, charged with everything they hadn't said. "You found the note," he said finally, voice rough, worn. "You left it," Emily replied, equally quiet. "Why?" William turned toward her, and in the moonlight she saw it, the rawness in his face, the desperate honesty he could no longer hide. "Because you deserve the truth," he said simply. "Not the polished version, not the half-truths." Emily crossed her arms, needing some kind of armor. "Then tell me," she said, her voice shaking. "All of it." He exhaled slowly, his breath misting in the cold air. "When Helena and I started the company, it was supposed to be about more than money. We had a dream, to build something that lasted." His eyes darkened. But somewhere along the way, greed poisoned everything. Emily watched him carefully. Every word felt like peeling off layers of old scars. "She started funneling funds out of the company," William continued, staring at the ground. "Small amounts at first, enough to stay hidden, but eventually it became too big to ignore." "You exposed her," Emily said softly, piecing it together. "I had to," William said. I thought the truth would save us, but it only made things worse. She dragged my name through the mud, twisted everything, said I was the one stealing, and people believed her because the world loves a fall from grace more than it loves the truth." Emily swallowed hard, the weight of his confession settling heavy in her chest. She believed him. God help her, she believed him. But belief wasn't the same as trust. "And me?" she whispered. "Where do I fit into all of this?" William stepped closer, slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "You're the first thing in years that isn't about business or survival or appearances. You're the first real thing I've touched in a long time." His voice broke. "And I'm terrified. I'll destroy you too." The words ripped through her, more devastating than any accusation or betrayal could have been, because she understood that fear. She carried it in her own heart, the fear of never being enough, of ruining everything good before it could even begin. Emily looked at him, really looked. She saw the cracks, the desperation, the lonely boy trapped inside the powerful man. She thought about the note in the church, about the old woman's words, "Choose with your heart." Slowly, Emily stepped forward until they were only inches apart. "I don't need you to be perfect, William," she said, voice trembling. "I just need you to be honest." "I can do that," he said, hoarse, "if you'll stay." The cliff winds howled around them, but Emily heard nothing but the pounding of her own heart. She reached out, fingers brushing his. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a grand gesture. It was something smaller, more important, the beginning of forgiveness. And for the first time, William Carter let someone see all of him, and didn't flinch away. The next morning, the house felt different, softer somehow. The walls that once loomed over Emily now seemed almost protective, sheltering her from the chaos outside. She moved through the kitchen with a lightness she hadn't felt in weeks, preparing breakfast with the kind of care reserved for new beginnings. William appeared in the doorway, barefoot, coffee mug in hand, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. His smile, small and unsure, met hers across the sunlit kitchen. No words were needed. They had survived the storm that raged between them. For now they were standing on the same side. They ate together at the counter, legs brushing under the stools, laughter coming easier than it had any right to. Emily let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe this could last, that maybe they could outrun their ghosts and build something stronger from the wreckage. But peace, she was learning, was always temporary in William Carter's world. It started with a phone call, urgent, shrill, slicing through the gentle rhythm of the morning. William's expression changed the moment he answered, his body going rigid, voice dropping into a clipped professional tone she hadn't heard since the early days. "No, delay the meeting," he barked into the phone. "I'll handle it personally." He ended the call, setting the phone down with a sharp click. Emily watched the shift happen, the warm man replaced by the calculating CEO. "What's wrong?" she asked carefully, dread already unfurling in her chest. William hesitated, glancing at her as if weighing how much to say. "Someone's been leaking information from inside the company," he said finally. "Private deals, client lists, sensitive stuff." Emily's stomach twisted. "And you think—" "I don't know yet," he admitted grimly. "But if it gets out, it could ruin everything." The memory of Helena's venomous words resurfaced, chilling Emily to the bone. "He ruins everything he touches." She pushed the thought away fiercely. No, not this time. They were different now. They had to be. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked, voice steady even though her insides shook. William looked at her for a long moment, something like gratitude softening his features. "Just stay close," he said quietly. "I don't know who to trust anymore." Later that afternoon, Emily found herself alone in the library, trying to distract herself with books she couldn't concentrate on. She was staring blankly at the spines when she noticed it. A flash of movement outside the window, a dark figure half hidden among the trees. She froze, heart thudding. Was it a gardener? Security? Something about the way the figure moved, cautious, deliberate, set every alarm inside her blaring. She rose slowly, careful not to make noise, and crept closer to the window. The figure turned just enough for her to catch a glimpse of a face she recognized. Too late. Helena. Shock rooted Emily to the floor for a second too long. By the time she wrenched herself into motion, the woman had disappeared into the trees. Emily dashed to the door, throwing it open, the cool wind slapping against her skin as she raced outside. "William!" she shouted, but her voice was swallowed by the roar of the waves below. She sprinted toward the cliff path, scanning the grounds desperately, but Helena was gone, a phantom slipping back into the shadows. When she stumbled back, inside, gasping for air, William met her in the hall, alarm etched into his face. "What happened?" "Helena," Emily panted. "She's here. I saw her." The blood drained from William's face. For a moment, pure, unfiltered rage crossed his features. And something else, fear. He grabbed Emily's shoulders, steadying her. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "From now on, you don't go anywhere alone. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, her pulse still hammering. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The atmosphere in the mansion thickened, almost suffocating in its heaviness. Extra security appeared overnight, silent men in black posted at every door, every window. Emily couldn't move without feeling a pair of eyes following her. The house that had once seemed too large now felt claustrophobic, like a fortress turned prison. William disappeared for hours at a time, locked in endless meetings or storming through corridors with his phone glued to his ear. Emily tried to stay out of the way, burying herself in the kitchen, but even there she couldn't escape the low hum of fear threading through every wall. It wasn't just Helena lurking in the shadows anymore. It was uncertainty, suspicion, a toxin spreading through every conversation, every glance. Emily no longer knew who she could trust. Even the house staff, once distant but polite, now moved around her stiffly, avoiding her eyes. One afternoon, while organizing the pantry, Emily overheard hushed voices beyond the swinging door. Two maids, whispering urgently. "She's the reason. This is happening," one hissed. "Ever since she came, everything's gone wrong." "She's got him wrapped around her little finger," the other muttered. "He doesn't see what she's doing." Emily's hands clenched into fists. She stepped back, heart pounding. It didn't matter how many cakes she baked or rooms she cleaned. To them, she would always be the outsider, the intruder who broke the invisible rules of their world. When William returned that night, exhaustion hung off him like a second skin. He found Emily in the kitchen, wiping the same spot on the counter over and over, lost in thought. He didn't speak right away. He just watched her with eyes that looked older than they had even a week ago. "You're scared," Emily said. Finally, not as an accusation, but as a quiet truth. William nodded slowly. "Helena's not just trying to destroy me anymore," he said. "She's trying to destroy you too." "Why?" Emily whispered. "Because hurting you is the only way left to hurt me," he said, voice breaking. The vulnerability in his face shattered whatever barriers Emily still had left. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, feeling him tense before he finally, slowly, allowed himself to collapse into her. For a long moment, they just stood there, two broken people clinging to the only thing that made sense anymore. The next morning, the betrayal came. Emily woke to the shrill buzz of her phone. Dozens of missed calls, flashing headlines, messages, pouring in faster than she could read. Her stomach twisted as she clicked open the first news article. Baker turned billionaire's mistress, Emily Jones accused of corporate espionage. Beneath the headline was a photo, her photo, splashed across every tabloid site in the city. Emily stumbled out of bed, barely able to breathe. She found William already in the library, pacing like a caged animal. When he saw her, something close to horror flickered in his eyes. "It's bad," he said simply. "How did they get this?" she demanded, voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "Someone inside," William said grimly. "Someone leaked fake evidence, documents, emails, all forged to make you look guilty." Emily staggered back, the room spinning around her. "They'll believe it," she said hollowly. "Even if it's not true, they'll believe it." William crossed the room in two strides, gripping her arms tightly. "I won't let them destroy you," he said fiercely. "I swear it." But Emily saw the desperation in his eyes and the terrible truth. Some battles couldn't be won with promises alone. Some battles demanded blood. The next 24 hours blurred into chaos. Calls from lawyers, furious emails from investors, headlines. Growing uglier by the minute, Emily's name became synonymous with betrayal. She could feel herself shrinking under the weight of it, every whisper and accusation cutting deeper than the last. William fought like hell to contain the damage. Meetings with crisis managers, statements drafted and redrafted, private investigators, scouring every trace of evidence. But no matter what he did, the tide of public opinion roared louder. It wasn't about facts, it was about the story. And Emily was the perfect villain. By noon, the mansion was flooded with reporters camped at the gates. Drones buzzed overhead like vultures, capturing every move. Emily stayed locked in her room, the curtains drawn tight, unable to bear the idea of her face flashing across 100 television screens. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone, rereading the messages pouring in. Some were cruel, others heartbreaking. Friends from her old life, confused and distant now, strangers offering sympathy or condemnation. A sinking feeling settled in her gut. Her old world had been stripped away, and her new one was crumbling. Under her feet, there was a knock at the door. She didn't answer. William entered anyway, closing it softly behind him. He looked exhausted, his suit jacket rumpled, tie askew. But when he met her eyes, there was no hesitation, only fire. "We found the leak," he said. Emily stood slowly, feeling as though the floor was tilting under her. "Who?" she asked barely, able to speak. "One of the staff," William said, his mouth twisted with disgust. "Bribed by Helena's people. Fed them fake emails, fake invoices, everything they needed to make you look guilty." The rage that flared in Emily's chest was white-hot. "And now?" she demanded. William hesitated. "Now? It doesn't matter." His voice was low, bitter. "The damage is done. They don't care about the truth anymore." Emily closed her eyes, fists clenching at her sides. All her life, she had been careful, humble, invisible. She had never asked for this, for fame, for love, for war. But it had found her anyway, and now she had a choice to make. Run, hide, let them bury her under their lies, or fight, even if she lost everything. She opened her eyes, meeting William's gaze head-on. "I'm not leaving," she said, voice steady. William's shoulders sagged, the smallest tremor of relief passing through him. "Emily, if you stay, it will get worse. They'll drag you through hell." "Maybe," she said, a tremor running through her bones. "But if I run, they win." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then William crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she thought he might be trying to shield her from the entire world. "Whatever happens," he whispered against her hair, "we face it together." That night, Emily stood in the grand entrance hall, facing a sea of reporters flashing cameras through the iron gates. William stood beside her, calm and unshakable, his hand brushing against hers like a silent promise. She stepped forward, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. She didn't need a speech. She didn't need perfect words. All she needed was the truth. "I'm not what they say," Emily said, voice carrying clear through the cool night air. "I may not belong in your world, but I know who I am." The cameras kept flashing, the questions kept shouting, but somewhere inside her a new strength lit. Up like fire, they would not break her. Not now, not ever. The morning after their stand at the gates, the world didn't magically heal, but something shifted. Emily felt it deep in her bones, like the first crack of sunlight after a storm. She wasn't invisible anymore, and even if the tabloids screamed louder than the truth, she had refused to be erased. Inside the mansion, there was no time to rest. William moved with renewed purpose, fueled by anger and something stronger, hope. Emily shadowed him through conference calls, lawyer meetings, endless strategy sessions. Every time she faltered, his hand found hers under the table, steadying her without a word. By noon, their legal team delivered the breakthrough they had prayed for. Hard evidence, real, undeniable, linking Helena to the falsified documents and the planted stories. Surveillance footage, wire transfers. Enough to not just clear Emily's name, but to burn Helena's entire operation to the ground. William stood at the head of the long oak table in the war room, fists clenched as the final report was laid out. His jaw tightened. His voice, when he spoke, was ice. "We go public," he said. "We take everything she built on lies and tear it apart." Emily nodded silently beside him. The fear was still there, buzzing under her skin, but it no longer controlled her. She wasn't the same girl who had stumbled into his world, carrying a box of cupcakes and a heart full of dreams. Later that afternoon, a press conference was hastily arranged. William insisted Emily be there beside him, not hidden, not protected, equal. The truth wasn't just his to tell anymore. It was theirs. The grand hall of the Carter building buzzed with reporters, cameras, and the hungry scent of scandal. William stepped up to the podium first, his presence commanding. The room fell silent at once, every eye locked on him. He didn't mince words. He laid out the evidence methodically, ruthlessly. Every lie Helena had spun was stripped bare, every scheme exposed. And when he finished, he turned, not to the cameras, but to Emily. He offered her the microphone, offered her the choice. Emily stepped forward, the weight of hundreds of flashing bulbs crashing down on her. She took a breath, a deep anchoring, and spoke. "I am not perfect," she said, voice steady despite the tremor threatening to betray her. "But I am not a thief. I am not a liar. I will not be your scapegoat." The murmurs rose, a tide of disbelief and grudging admiration. She could feel it. The shift, the moment when the crowd realized they were not watching a victim, but a survivor. When they left the podium, reporters still shouted questions, but Emily barely heard them. William's hand found hers again as they slipped into the waiting car. For a long moment, neither spoke. The adrenaline, the fear, the victory. It was too much to fit into words. Finally, William broke the silence. "You were incredible," he said, voice rough with emotion. Emily smiled faintly, exhausted beyond measure, but somehow lighter than she'd felt in months. "We were incredible," she corrected him gently, but victory, she knew, wasn't the same as peace. Helena wouldn't go down without a fight. And even if the worst was behind them, scars had a way of lingering long after the battlefield was abandoned. That night, as Emily wandered alone through the gardens, she thought about everything she had lost and everything she had found. Pain, betrayal, love, resilience. Pieces of herself she hadn't even known were missing until William had forced her to face them. The sky overhead was vast and clear, stars scattered like promises across the black velvet. Somewhere inside the house, William was waiting, but Emily stayed outside for a while longer, letting herself breathe in the cool night air. Because tomorrow, the future would demand more from her than ever before, and tonight she was still free. Weeks later, the Carter estate no longer resembled the tense battlefield it once had been. The cameras had moved on. The scandal had burned itself out. Helena was facing charges. The world, restless and forgetful, had found new scandals to devour. But for Emily, the real transformation was quieter, deeper, stitched into the walls she once feared. The kitchen, once a sterile shrine, to perfection now smelled of cinnamon and warm bread. Emily leaned over a tray of fresh pastries, laughing as William tried and failed to pipe icing onto a cake without making a total mess. He wiped frosting from his fingers and grinned at her, boyish and unguarded. "You're terrible at this," she teased, bumping her hip against his. "I'm a man of many talents," he replied dryly. "Baking is just not one of them." They had found a rhythm now, one built on honesty, patience, and stubborn, relentless hope. It wasn't perfect. There were still bad days, sharp words, silent battles fought in glances instead of shouting. But beneath it all there was trust, hard-earned and fiercely protected. One evening, as the sun dipped below the cliffs and painted the world gold, William took Emily's hand and led her down a hidden path she had never noticed before. They walked in silence, the sea murmuring far below, the air heavy with something she couldn't name. At the end of the path stood a small, overgrown greenhouse, forgotten, abandoned. Emily gasped softly, taking in the crumbling vines, the shattered glass, the stubborn shoots of green breaking through the cracks. It was beautiful in its brokenness. "This was my mother's," William said quietly. "She loved growing things. Even when the world outside fell apart, she believed in planting roots." Emily turned to him, heart swelling painfully. She understood. Now, understood why he fought so hard, why he built walls so high. He hadn't been protecting himself from the world. He had been protecting the fragile, precious parts of himself that still dared to hope. "I want to rebuild it," William said, voice rough. "Not alone, with you." Emily blinked, her throat tightening. "Me," she whispered. "You," he said simply, as if there had never been another choice. "You're the only thing real enough, strong, enough to make something new here." Tears blurred her vision. She reached out, brushing her fingers over his. "Okay," she whispered, "let's build something together." Over the next few months, the greenhouse became their sanctuary. They cleared the debris, planted herbs and flowers, laughed and fought, and dreamed in the patch of stubborn earth no scandal could touch. Emily learned the patience of growth, how some roots took time to settle before they flourished. Word spread quietly through the city about what they were building. Not a business empire, not a dynasty, but a small, stubborn dream. A bakery and garden cafe open to everyone. No velvet ropes, no secret passwords, just warmth, honesty, and food made with care. On opening day, the line stretched down the hill. Locals, tourists, even some of William's old enemies, all waiting for a taste of something that wasn't polished or marketed, but real. Emily stood at the counter, apron dusted with flour, heart hammering in her chest. William stood behind, her a hand on her shoulder, steady and sure. "You did this," he murmured. "We did," she corrected, smiling up at him through the joyful chaos. As the first customer stepped forward, a little girl clutching her mother's hand, Emily leaned across the counter, offering a cupcake topped with wild flowers from their garden. "Welcome to Roots and Dreams," she said, voice steady and proud. And as laughter and conversation filled the air, as the greenhouse bloomed around them and the sea sang below, Emily knew, for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was finally, fiercely living. Wow, what a story, right? I'd love to hear what you thought. Drop a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tell me where you're watching from. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories we have on the channel. There's so much more waiting for you.